Strong emotional introduction. There are moments in life when a simple act of kindness ripples outward like stones thrown into still water, creating waves we never see coming. For Marcus Thompson, a 38-year-old single father juggling 2 jobs and raising his 7-year-old daughter alone, compassion wasn't a choice, it was who he was, woven into the fabric of his being despite the weight of his own struggles. Every morning at 6:15 a.m., as the Philadelphia streets awakened with the shuffle of early commuters and the distant rumble of delivery trucks, Marcus would stop at the corner of Walnut and Fifth, where an elderly woman sat huddled against the cold brick wall of a shuttered storefront. Her name was Eleanor, though it took 3 weeks before she trusted him enough to share it. What Marcus didn't know was that his small, consistent acts of human decency were about to change both their lives in ways that defied imagination, and that one ordinary Tuesday morning, 4 bodyguards and a team of lawyers would walk through that very corner and reveal a truth that would shake him to his core. Marcus had never planned to be a single father. Life, he'd learned, rarely consulted you about its plans. When his wife Sarah passed away from cancer 3 years ago, leaving him alone with their daughter Emma, the world had tilted on its axis. Everything became harder, the mornings more exhausting, the nights lonelier, the weight of responsibility crushing. But Emma needed him, and that need became his North Star. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a downtown office building from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., then rushed across town to his second job at a grocery store, stocking shelves until closing at 10 p.m. The mathematics of survival left little room for anything else. Yet every morning, without fail, he stopped for Eleanor. She'd appeared on that corner sometime in late September, when autumn was just beginning to paint the city in shades of amber and rust. At first, she was just another face among the homeless population that dotted Philadelphia's streets, invisible to most passers-by who hurried past with their lattes and their smartphones, eyes carefully averted. But Marcus saw her. Maybe it was because his own mother had struggled with homelessness for a brief, terrifying period when he was a teenager. Maybe it was because Emma had recently asked him why some people slept outside, and her innocent question had cracked something open in his chest. Or maybe it was simply that beneath the exhaustion and the grief, Marcus was fundamentally good. The first morning, he'd simply handed her his own breakfast, a bagel with cream cheese that he'd grabbed from a discount bakery. She'd looked at him with eyes that held both suspicion and desperate gratitude, but she'd taken it. The next morning, he brought 2. By the end of the first week, their routine was established. He'd stop, crouch down to her level, never standing over her, always meeting her with dignity, and they'd talk. Brief conversations at first, about the weather, about the city, about nothing important. But gradually, Eleanor began to share fragments of her story. She'd been a teacher once, she told him. Taught English literature at a private school. But life had a way of unraveling, thread by thread. A car accident that left her with chronic pain. Medical bills that mounted like snow in a blizzard. The pain medication that helped at first, then gripped her in its merciless claws. The loss of her job, her apartment, her dignity piece by piece. By the time she understood what was happening, she was already on the streets, another casualty of a system that ground people down and spit them out. Marcus listened without judgment. He brought her coffee, hot, with cream and sugar the way she liked it. Sometimes a sandwich. On particularly cold mornings, he'd bring an extra scarf or gloves, items he'd pick up at thrift stores with money he could barely spare. Emma noticed, of course. Children always do. "Daddy, why do you always stop for the lady?" she'd asked one morning from her booster seat in the back of his 15-year-old Honda. Marcus had looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, at her earnest brown eyes so much like her mother's, and chosen his words carefully. "Because she's a person, sweetheart. Just like you and me. And everybody deserves kindness, especially when life gets hard." Emma had nodded solemnly, processing this with the serious consideration that 7-year-olds sometimes possess. The next day, she'd insisted on including an extra juice box in the breakfast bag for Eleanor. Marcus's heart had swelled with pride so fierce it hurt. Months passed. Fall surrendered to winter's bitter cold, and Marcus brought Eleanor thermal blankets. He'd researched homeless shelters in the area, gently suggesting them, but Eleanor always declined with a shake of her head. "Not safe for someone like me," she'd said cryptically, and something in her eyes prevented him from pushing. Winter gave way to early spring, and still their morning routine continued. Other commuters occasionally noticed, some with approval, others with the pursed-lipped disapproval of those who believed poverty was a moral failing. Marcus ignored them all. What he didn't know was that Eleanor was watching him just as carefully as he watched over her. She saw how his shoulders sagged with exhaustion, how his work boots were held together with duct tape, how he sometimes rubbed his temples as if pushing back a headache born of too little sleep and too much worry. She heard him mention, once, that Emma's school had a field trip he wasn't sure he could afford. She noticed everything, filing it all away behind eyes that, despite homelessness, retained a sharp and calculating intelligence. On the Tuesday morning that would change everything, Marcus arrived at the corner at his usual time, carrying the usual brown paper bag. But Eleanor wasn't alone. Standing around her were 4 men in dark suits, built like linebackers, their stance unmistakably that of professional security. And beside them, 2 people in expensive business attire, a man and a woman, both carrying leather briefcases that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Marcus froze, his mind immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. Was Eleanor in trouble? Were they clearing the homeless from this area? His protective instincts flared. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The woman in the business suit stepped forward, her heels clicking on the pavement. "Mr. Thompson. Mr. Marcus Thompson." The use of his full name sent alarm bells ringing. "Who's asking?" "My name is Jennifer Hartwell, and this is Richard Chen. We're attorneys with Hartwell and Associates." She gestured to Eleanor, who was standing now, looking far more steady and composed than Marcus had ever seen her. "We represent Mrs. Eleanor Ashford." "Mrs. Ashford has been on these streets for the past 7 months, Richard added, as part of what we might call an unconventional research project. Marcus's confusion must have shown on his face because Eleanor, Mrs. Ashford, stepped forward, her eyes suddenly clear and sharp in a way they'd never been before. When she spoke, her voice had lost the tremulous quality he'd grown accustomed to. "Marcus, I need to explain something to you, and I hope you'll understand why I did what I did." "I don't understand what's happening," Marcus said slowly. Eleanor took a breath. "My late husband, Charles Ashford, founded Ashford Industries. Perhaps you've heard of it." Marcus had. Everyone in Philadelphia had. Ashford Industries was a massive conglomerate, manufacturing, real estate, investments. Billionaire-level wealth. "Charles passed away 2 years ago," Eleanor continued, "and left me with a fortune I never wanted and a challenge I took seriously. You see, my husband believed that true character reveals itself in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. He established a foundation in his will, $100 million to be distributed to individuals who demonstrate exceptional kindness and compassion, not for recognition or reward, but simply because it's right." Marcus felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. I volunteered to be the test case," Eleanor interrupted gently. "With full surveillance, with support just out of sight, I lived on these streets for 7 months. Dozens of people passed me every day. Some gave spare change. A few stopped to chat. But you, Marcus, you were the only one who showed up every single day, without fail. Who brought breakfast, who brought warmth, who brought dignity. Who saw a person, not a problem." Jennifer Hartwell opened her briefcase. "Mr. Thompson, the Ashford Foundation would like to present you with a grant of $10 million, to be used for your family's needs and for any charitable purposes you see fit." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. $10 million. Marcus's knees went weak, and one of the bodyguards stepped forward instinctively before Marcus steadied himself. "I can't. I don't." Words failed him entirely. "There's more," Richard said, pulling out another document. "Mrs. Ashford was so moved by your consistent kindness that she'd like to offer you a position as director of the Ashford Foundation's new Compassion Initiative. It comes with a salary of $200,000 annually, full benefits, and the ability to identify and support others who demonstrate the kind of humanity you've shown." Eleanor moved closer, and now Marcus could see tears in her eyes, real tears. "You treated me with dignity every single day, Marcus. You never looked away. You never made me feel less than human. And when your daughter asked why you helped me, you taught her that kindness isn't transactional. That's worth more than any of this money. But the money, that's my way of saying thank you, and of making sure that your kindness is rewarded in a world that so rarely rewards the good people." Marcus thought of Emma, of the worn-out apartment they called home, of the field trips he couldn't afford and the college fund that didn't exist. He thought of his mother, who'd clawed her way back from homelessness and still worked 2 jobs at 63. He thought of the countless nights he'd lain awake wondering how he'd make everything work. And then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He started to cry. Not quiet tears, but great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in his soul, from 3 years of grief and struggle and exhaustion, from the weight of trying to be enough for his daughter, from the fear that had lived in his chest like a stone. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, this woman he'd thought homeless and helpless, and let him cry on the shoulder of her expensive blouse. When he finally pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, he looked at her with wonder. "I just wanted to help," he said simply. "I know," Eleanor replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "That's exactly why you deserve this." 3 months later, Marcus stood in his new office at the Ashford Foundation headquarters, a beautiful space with windows overlooking the city, where he could see the corner of Walnut and 5th in the distance. Emma was enrolled in an excellent private school, his mother had retired comfortably, and he'd already identified 3 other individuals for the foundation's grants. But more than any of that, he'd learned something profound, that kindness always matters, even when, especially when, no one is watching. The world was full of Eleanor Ashfords, he realized. Not wealthy women testing character, but real people struggling and suffering, hoping for someone to see them. And if his story inspired even one more person to stop, to help, to simply care, then perhaps the ripple effect of kindness really could change the world. Every morning now, he still bought 2 coffees. But instead of one corner, he made it his mission to find new corners, new faces, new opportunities to see the humanity in others. Because Marcus Thompson understood something essential, wealth hadn't changed who he was. He'd always been rich in the ways that mattered most. The money had simply given him the means to spread that wealth more widely. And on the corner of Walnut and 5th, where a broken man once stopped each day to help a woman he thought was lost, there now stood a small plaque that read, "Kindness spoken here. Always."